Now before I see any dislikes in YouTube Studio, you need to let me to explain. Toy Story 4 is a great heartful film that really is a terrible sequel to a story that has already finished. It's just adding too much to something that doesn't need to be continued, and I intend to explain that. The Toy Story franchise is probably one of the most iconic and beloved of all time, with each becoming classic masterpieces in their own right that charts the journey of Andy and his love for his toys, and moving on from that and toward a newer generation. I decided to discuss this in detail after pointing out the uselessness of Pixar sequels and why they are derived from the creative stories to begin with, except mostly in the case of Toy Story itself, that managed to entertain people throughout the entire course of time, but even that can eventually run its course like in number 4. The entire story of Toy Story was about finding yourself, how at first it seemed like Woody was forgotten and his entire world collapsed because of Buzz, and how Buzz actually realized who exactly he was, and continuing on with that with characters like Jessie, who was forgotten by her previous owner, and so on with other toys. And that message was never really changed in any way, still keeping within the main theme of the franchise, and why it works so well against the sea of other failed sequels that didn't really recapture their messages at all. But then again, when you look at Toy Story 4, it's an actual film that repeats itself, setting up a story that is new but is somehow familiar in the case of Woody getting forgotten by his owner, an owner that promised to take good care of him, and that's what enraged me the most about this movie after I watched it for the first time. And now they're going to make another sequel to this story, thinking that would actually be a good idea after making something as pathetic as Lightyear that signifies how we really need to move on from these franchise of films. It just seems that nowadays Disney seems like they cannot create anything new anymore, announcing the return of Toy Story 5. Now this movie reintroduced the return of Bo Peep after her absence for so long at the end of Toy Story 2, where the beginning of the film flashes back to the events that caused her absence that was dropped in Toy Story 3, where we see here that they tried to rescue RC from being washed away and they managed to save him, but then she gets donated to a new owner and tells Woody that this is the way it must be, that how eventually she was not going to be Andy's toy forever like Woody was. And that's what is set up for the main theme in the entire story as a whole, about moving on in life and what happens in the amount of time that you last saw someone. But what happens after is completely the wrong way to go about it, with this montage of Andy playing with his toys and actually recapping the ending of Toy Story 3, before presenting us back to the present day, where it has been roughly only about a year since the events of the last film and the shorts that followed it. Like, I really want you to focus on this one scene right here and the scene from Toy Story 3 and ingrain that right into your subconscious right now, because this is where the main plot point of the movie happens. Because right away in the film they establish how it's been a while since Woody was actually played with. Bonnie is actually playing with her other toys, instead leaving him in the closet, and he takes the initiative to go to school with her as it is her first day back in the summer. He feels neglected and he wants to be back in her life to take care of her. Well, of course in this case it's not back to school just yet, as it was an orientation, where the family actually plans a vacation right after, where she gets adjusted to this new life and creates a new toy creation of her own, the first of its kind in Toy Story, where we actually see a literal inanimate object come to life, sort of explaining how toys are alive in this series. And we see how important this new friend becomes to Bonnie and how we know of her love of toys, like what Andy had in the previous 3 films. The difference here, as mentioned earlier, is the neglect of Woody himself. Throughout various montages, we see that Woody seeks to protect Forky and how much this new toy actually means to her, being her new pal in the world of new kids, while at the same time forgetting about Woody in that process. Like, sure, she actually plays with him a little bit, but they really put the emphasis of how she cares more about these other toys instead of him, and how these other toys for the majority of the film actually don't do much for half the time that they are in, just stuck in the RV while mainly taking a journey with Woody, Buzz, Bo Peep, and Forky, and a new cast of other toys. And this action is completely hypocritical of Bonnie to do, or the filmmakers to do so in general, from what happened at the end of Toy Story 3. This was the story that really ended Toy Story to begin with the sending off to a newer generation, and now we are forgetting that very ending. It's like we forgot the importance of that very ending of the previous movie in order to tell something new and different, and it doesn't work because of the whole spiel that Andy virtually made to Bonnie was made to be complete nothing, and everything that Bonnie did with Woody in Toy Story 3 also meant nothing. Because if you remember back in that story, Woody was the toy that Bonnie found and actually played with as her own, and we see this at the start of the film where the bottom of his boot is signed with her name like Andy was before. But now in the situations that have presented ourselves, it's like she just forgot what even happened in the slightest at the beginning of the film in order to share these new characters like Forky to take shape and set this up Bo Peep story in the future. Like, I'm pretty sure 90% of her screen time is just about caring about a plastic fork over all the other toys that she's previously owned, or the ones that Andy gave her. It's a situation where, like, if Andy actually found out about this, he would probably take his toys back in a heartbeat for being so neglected when he himself spent a lot of time with them, as he was himself a little bit older in the earlier Toy Story films from where Bonnie first started, and Bonnie is only a year older now, who forgets everything so easily. I really don't understand this point of making this if you're going to ignore everything that was established within your main human characters, the real heart of the story that actually gives gives toys purpose in life, where now most of them have been abandoned or forgotten. Everyone that is not the main three or Forky, who had important roles in the journey of our characters before, don't matter anymore. But even out of all of that, the real problem is with Woody himself and the journey he takes with Bo Peep. In between the films, Bo Peep actually found a new purpose for herself beyond that of a toy, helping others and not worrying about what is going to happen, living carefree in her life and just taking Woody on this journey. It just becomes very clear how much Bo has moved on from what we would normally see from an old flame or an ex or whatever in that case, where in the case of Woody, he has always demonstrated loyalty to his owner no matter the cost. It's this interesting clash of ideas that this movie wants to tell us. And the problem with this is how this movie suggests that Woody could not let go of the past with Bo, caring much about her when she actually cares more about his sheep than he does, and more than his only job to get Forky back to Bonnie, as that what mattered most to him at the time. The movie did a good job of undermining their relationship from past films and what they had, where Bo Peep kept him calm as the leader of the game, where now nothing actually matches up with his new Bo Peep, who is in fact made out of porcelain. Her whole personality is derived from being that way, and having her be this action-packed heroine that she started at the beginning of this very film does not make any sense for a character to begin with. I mean, it's okay if you just look at it from Toy Story 4 by itself, but this film is attached to those previous films to ever see it in that way, and that's why it completely fails. And of course, in cases of moving back to Woody, it's just that he's already been in this position before within the very first Toy Story film itself when Buzz was first introduced, and now that Bonnie has done the same thing with Forky, where the difference is this film is that Woody is actually helping Forky this time. And of course, instead of sticking by his owner like he did with Andy in the beginning, he now moves on with Bo Peep to have adventures with her, instead of what he did by learning and growing in those previous 3 films that made him stick by no matter what happened with Buzz at his side. Which brings up another thing about the relationship between Buzz and Woody in this film, bringing us way back to the end of Toy Story 2 from this scene right here.
Besides, when it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company. For infinity and beyond.
And looking at it, you can see how Toy Story 4 ignores this statement entirely, because this is a line that actually matches up with the ending of Toy Story 3 instead, where they are all together after Andy grew up and the movie ends. Their journey and relationship is probably of the core of what makes Toy Story Toy Story, and the journey that Buzz has throughout this film is more of a side partner because of the emphasis on Bo Peep's character. Like he was just a toy chosen out of the group that was neglected for the whole entire movie to be more involved because of how important he is to the entire series, where he is also there to share the final emotional moment between both Buzz and Woody, the 2 main characters of the entire franchise. And I'll admit that I almost cried in theaters when I saw this for something I grew up with, but I also realized how much I absolutely hated because of that line that Woody said from Toy Story 2 earlier, to be there till the very end. And now we are presented with this situation where we have moved on from that ending to this or whatever. This ending where Woody leaves is a betrayal of everything we knew from his character from 1 through 3, that no matter what happened, he would always stick by Andy's side or his other toy friends, and now he goes off with Bo Peep, who is actually a little bit okay to say goodbye to Woody to rejoin them yet again, but because Bonnie didn't actually play with him throughout the entire film, he went with her instead because of his gut emotions for his feelings for her. I mean, of course, Bonnie did not play with Woody as much as he would like, but that's the situation he's already been with before, and he still stuck by their side no matter what happened, and we saw Andy still keep playing with Woody as time eventually went on. I mean, the setting they had was a beautiful moment, but one you can't help overlook from its past and everything it represented. The older cast here are reduced because some are no longer with us, and it was just time to move on to newer characters. But of course, in realizing that, I just couldn't understand why they couldn't focus on a different set of characters like the middle of the film produced by focusing on these new ones instead. Why focus on them when the story has been about these ones the entire time throughout 1, 2, 3, and 4? The movie just jumbles back and forth between all of these ideas and elements that don't really add up to its past nor its future. Like, why are you having Woody betray his character trait of loyalty no matter what the cost is because of his relationship to Bo Peep? There's literally no point to his character anymore if he thinks this way because he's older, where you leave them off in the situation where they should have stayed at the daycare from Toy Story 3, as that would be generations and generations of kids for a very long time. So you can see, the real point I'm trying to make is that Toy Story 4 really is a terrible sequel that ignores everything important to what the story had, and is really a clear evidence as to why sequels are not very necessary in the case of not improving over the very story. Instead of improving upon a story, you actually destroyed it with this epilogue that is covered up being a good film. Like I said before, Toy Story 4 is not bad and is really a good time, but when it stands by everything else makes it absolutely horrendous to that story and only serves to point out that you want to milk the franchise as much as possible in the public eye instead of focusing on innovating or whatnot that we expect Pixar to do from before. And I know I didn't get into all of this nitty gritty of the story, but I just wanted to focus on these core elements of what makes the film go against everything that we have known. Everything that the characters like Bonnie does is completely hypocritical from her character from 3, everything that Woody does or Buzz does or anyone else is completely hypocritical from the characters throughout 1 through 3, and it just doesn't add up. But with all of that said, that's all I really have to say for Toy Story 4, and realizing why it is a terrible sequel to begin with. So I'm all done now, so goodbye.